Hello, welcome to week 2 of our summer series. I hope you've had a good week and you're keeping well. If you listened to Johnny last week, you'll know that this is part of a series over the next few weeks where we are exploring Acts, and it is with the overriding theme of what will help us to follow Jesus. There are 3 parts: what will help us to follow Jesus, exploring Acts, and the application part. And it's me this week to take us through Acts 23 to 26 to have a look at our confidence in Jesus. It's obviously, I'm not going to read all of that out. There's a lot of scripture to read, but I would encourage you to do it in your own time. But I'm going to give an overview of Paul's story over these 3 chapters, with some context thrown in and some sort of wrap up briefly what happens over those chapters until you can read it yourself. Paul, as we know, was faithful and a Jew, and he, in this part of his story, he risks his life, and he's been arrested, but he's a Roman citizen, so they're not really sure what to do with him, where to place him. There's obviously conflicting laws between Jewish law and Roman law, and it's quite a complicated process. And no one can really agree on what to do with him or where to place him. And he goes to trial, and he hasn't actually committed a crime. He hasn't actually done anything wrong. And so people, like I said, they can't agree. It gets really heated, and there's the threat of violence quite a few times throughout the story. And actually the Romans protect Paul from this violence. He doesn't actually get hurt, he is protected. And unlike the other gods of the time that others would have believed in, this really clearly demonstrates to the people of the time, and for us now reading it, looking in, that there just isn't a place for violence when we're following Jesus, and that God protected Paul from this, and because God was so different to what was going on around at the time, and the other gods that people would have believed in that sort of ruled with this violent nature, and God wasn't anything like that, and that's sort of demonstrated here. And because violence always leads to disaster and chaos and bigger problems, so our weapons as followers of Jesus should be truth. We shouldn't, have swords and violence, and that's sort of demonstrated in that little part of the story there. So he's passed around Paul between people, and people are arguing over him, and there's a lot going on, and there's a lot of resistance among the Jewish people to Paul's mission, which is it's gathering momentum. And there's been a lot of resistance, and his mission was obviously to tell people about Jesus and about the gospel. But God's plan for Paul was to testify about Jesus in Rome. So in Acts 23, verse 11, it reads, "The night the Lord appeared to Paul and said, 'Be encouraged, Paul. Just as you have been a witness to me here in Jerusalem, you must preach the good news in Rome as well.'" So that's Acts 23:11. So God is coming alongside Paul, and there's all this chaos and uncertainty going on, and he's telling Paul to be encouraged. Depending on what version you read, sometimes it says to have courage, and that he is going to, or God wants him to, share the good news in Rome. And obviously at the minute he is not there. So the Lord is standing by Paul despite these circumstances going on. And so throughout that passage as well, as we read on further, it indicates that there's a nephew of Paul around. It doesn't really say much about him, but it does indicate that there was some sort of family, and we don't really know much on whether they were sort of supporting him through this trial, whether they were around, whether they'd abandoned him, we're not sure. But the point I think that is really clearly made is that despite it being a really dark time for Paul, with uncertainty and false accusations and trials and violence and all sorts going on, God hasn't abandoned him, that he is not alone. You know, his life's hanging in the balance, and I can't imagine that he's feeling very positive about that, but Jesus has come alongside him at that time and promised him that he will sort of speak in Rome and share the gospel in Rome. And the details are unclear. He doesn't tell him how that's going to happen. He doesn't tell him, you know, I'm going to get you off this charge and then we're going to travel here and I'm going to do this and then you'll do this. He doesn't know the details. So there is that element of trusting God in what he said when he's come alongside him, that okay, this is the situation that I'm in now, but God has told me that I am going to tell other people about him in Rome, so I can have confidence that I'm going to get to that point despite what's happening around me. And it would have been a time of desperation for Paul, and it would have been a really dark and difficult time, but he knows that the Lord has stepped in. He's given him this encouragement at the right time, and Paul knows God and he knows him well, so he knows that he can have that confidence in him to trust what he said and to hold on to that as his journey sort of unfolds. And it was becoming a bit of a public witness to God and the importance of following him. It was developing into Paul being able to speak about God rather than just defending himself and saying, well, I haven't actually committed a crime. There is obviously part of that, it's the trial going on, but it sort of develops into a situation where Paul is able to use the opportunity to tell people about Jesus, and the purpose of the situation is very different. You know, he's in the situation to explain himself against these crimes. That situation hasn't changed. God hasn't removed him out of that situation, but he has used that situation with a different purpose, to be able to share with others about him rather than defending his actions, just defending his actions with the crime. So it highlights for us, it encourages us that when our purpose is Jesus, when we have confidence in Jesus, you know, I'm sure there are times that you have felt that he has said things to you about what he's going to do in your life or how he can use you in your life. When that is our purpose, when Jesus is our purpose and our focus, when we have that confidence in him, what is going on around us doesn't matter as much. Doesn't mean it's not going to be hard to go through. It doesn't mean that the situation is gone and removed because of our confidence. It means that through those situations we know who God is, and we know that he has a bigger purpose, and our confidence in him doesn't need to waver or sort of fade if we're going through bad times. No matter what we're going through, we can stand firm on that we know who he is and that we can be confident in him. So it's clear through that despite what seems like a disaster at the time, that he's been arrested for crimes he hasn't committed and it's escalated, probably didn't seem great, I'll be honest, for him, poor Paul. God's plan and purposes are being worked out through Paul's story. He's not let off the charges. There's mobs, there's violence, there's more imprisonment. There's a lot going on as the chapter continues. But the purpose for Paul is to get to Rome to tell other people about Jesus. And that's unfolding regardless of everything else going on. That is still happening, and God is still allowing that to happen through that story. So this ordeal for Paul carries on into Acts 24, and he spends a couple of years with somebody called Felix, and I think Felix is hoping for a bribe from Paul, really. He's hoping that he will get something out of it, and that Paul will give him some money or something so that he can release him. But instead of that, Paul uses that time to talk with Felix and his wife and to tell them about Jesus, to tell them his story, to tell them what he's been going through, to explain about the trial and why he's with him. But he doesn't use that time to kind of woo Felix and to get something out of it, to think, okay, if I get on his side, if I play the game, if I do the right, if I say the right things, he's going to let me go. He is aware of his greater purpose of being there and this situation, and he uses the time over that couple of years to tell Felix and others about Jesus, and all the time, like, God is bringing more people into Paul's story to hear about him. So if Paul wasn't focused on that, it maybe would be quite overwhelming for him to think, okay, like, I'm in prison here, I've got to spend time with this person who won't let me go, there's another person coming to talk to me. It's quite a lot, but because his focus is on, okay, I know what God wants from me, he's able to use that time, he's able to be aware of the opportunities that God's presenting to him through the situation, to be able to use them to tell people about God. So no opportunity is wasted, and it's all wrapped up in the trial and here in Paul's case, but there is sort of a deeper meaning to the conversations in it, and it allows new opportunities. So that all unfolds, and Felix is maybe a bit of a questionable character. He is obviously wanting a bribe, so he's maybe not that honourable, and again Paul uses that, and sort of a bit of chapter 24 goes into Paul sort of challenging maybe Felix on some of his morals and actions, and again not using the opportunity to just sort of butter him up to get out of the bad situation he's in, but to be like, well, no, if I'm here and I have this opportunity, I'm going to use it, and I'm going to tell him about God's truth, and that there's another way to live, and that he doesn't have to live in this way, but that he can know someone who can allow him to live differently. So he shares the gospel with Felix, and I think he sort of gets a bit freaked out, and then he goes and someone else comes in, Festus, and as you read it you will see that. But again, it's just an example of another opportunity that God has presented Paul throughout this to another person to talk to. So it's exciting for us to read it and to see that. I'm sure for Paul at the time maybe it wasn't that exciting, but for us to see that unfolding and the opportunities from the outside looking in, it's encouraging for us for our lives now. So into Acts 25, and Paul decides to appeal his case to Caesar. He knows that he will never get a fair trial where he is at the minute, so he escalates it. And just as God said, this means that it allows him to go to Rome, where all the way along from Acts 23:11, God has said that is what will happen. Paul has been caught up in all of these events that have been outside of his control, they've been out of his hands, but the whole time that it's been going on, God has very much been in control, and again that is really encouraging for us to read and to see and to know that God is still in control of our lives, even if we may feel like there's a lot going on. So that's a good part of that. So yeah, Paul's opponents the whole time have been malicious and unfair, but God has protected him from their plots along the way that you'll read throughout the stories. He hasn't got what he wants out of it, Paul. He hasn't been freed still. He's still enduring all of this, but he has stood firm on God's promise and had confidence that it will be fulfilled. And this has allowed Paul to see opportunities along the way and to use the events to tell his story to different people over the years and to sort of tell them and demonstrate who God is. And Jesus has been faithful throughout. There have been really dark moments for Paul, experience that we have really briefly gone over them, obviously, and it hasn't been easy, but Jesus has stood by him and seen him through everything, and allowed Paul to see past the limits of his own experience that he was going through at the time, and to keep in mind the greater, the bigger picture of what God was doing, to not, I'm sure he did get really down and fed up, but he still allowed himself to get past that and to use the moments that he was going through well for God. So we get to Acts 26. And Paul's continuing obedience enables him to turn his defence into an appeal for other people to follow Jesus. God has continually presented Paul with these opportunities to share the gospel, and now it has become on a public platform, and he's able to tell the people around him, who are both Roman governors and Jewish people as well, so there was a mix of everybody there, and he was able to, in Acts 26, tell people about Jesus and the resurrection. So that's a really brief overview of what happens in Acts 23 to 26, and like I said, obviously read that in your own time as well, so that you can understand what those bits a bit better. But really, what I've picked out from it, there's a lot to unpack. There's a lot of other things that are going on in there that I haven't sort of mentioned, because I want to encourage us today with thinking about confidence in Jesus and our story. Now I want to sort of encourage us that this message, this experience that Paul has gone through is still relevant for us today in our lives, that we may not have those exact circumstances that Paul had gone through in terms of us standing trial for a crime that we haven't committed, and mobs trying to get us, and all the things that he went through. It may not be exactly the same situation, but we do have some dark times, and we do experience things in our lives that, potentially feel like I'm sure Paul did, you feel like you can't cope with them, can't carry on with them, and you think, oh God, this is too much. We all have things in our lives that get us to that point, or that it just seems like trial after trial after trial. But we have the same God that Paul had back then, and we can have that same confidence in who he is and his promises and his bigger purpose for our lives now. Just the same as Paul, we can use those times that we go through to really see what opportunities God is presenting to us in the process, and that we shouldn't be afraid or ashamed of those times, that we shouldn't. I think sometimes it can feel like we just want to erase the bad things that have ever happened to us and only ever talk about the good things. And, obviously we want to tell people about God's goodness and his faithfulness and how kind he is to us, and all the good parts. So we want to share. It's nice to share the good parts of our lives. But I think without experiencing the dark times or telling people about those times, we can't show God's light and God's goodness in the same way. It doesn't have the same impact. If everything is always good all the time, it's easy to see light in darkness. So it's those dark times that we really do see God come through, and we're able to tell people how we got through those times, because we believe in a God who helped us through them, and they reflect sort of our assurance in who God is, our confidence, and that we have confidence that Jesus is standing by us through it all, and he is ultimately in control. And I think instead of us shying away from those times, there's power in our stories. We shouldn't underestimate the importance of sharing our stories and using those to tell people about Jesus and share the gospel. Just like Paul in those Acts 23 to 26, there's something really powerful about being able to tell people, okay, this happened and I went through this, and through that God allowed me to talk to this person, or through my grief or through my experience of, whatever it may be for you, debt, divorce, loss of loved ones, lots that we could say we've been through, through that God stood by me. I had confidence that I knew his promises and his purposes were true for my life, and that enabled me to walk through that time knowing that I had God stood with me through it, and allowing me to have opportunities with other people that I may not have been able to speak to before if I hadn't have gone through that. If Paul hadn't have gone through the trial the way that he did, if he hadn't have been arrested and imprisoned, he may not have been able to speak to Felix and his wife, or have got to Rome, or God is in control of the whole story and the bigger picture of our lives. So don't underestimate kind of your story and what you go through, because it is through that people will see Jesus, and will allow you the opportunity to sort of share him with others through what you go through. And I think that is encouraging, that in what seems like our darkest times, we can have that confidence that we know that God is still in control, and there is still more to life than what we are going through at that moment in time. So I think it's just to encourage you this week to be brave, to maybe share parts of your story that you think could encourage people, that God has allowed you to go through in order for his glory to shine through it. It's not for us to just have a miserable time, but it is that we go through these things in order for us to see God at work within our lives, and for other people to see that as well. So I hope that encourages you. I hope that you're able this week to be brave and have that confidence to know that Jesus is with you every step of the way, no matter what you go through, and to share that with others so that they can see and know him as well. I hope you have a really good week, and I hope that encourages you, and let me know your thoughts when you have a read through on what you think Paul went through, and have a chat about what you think about that and what that means to you and for your story. Okay, thanks. Bye.